Welcome back to our Festival of Coexistence. We would also like to greet our new participants, newcomers. On this session, we will talk about philanthropy discussions focused on human rights and the philanthropic perception toward rights-oriented institutions, how grant processes can be designed by getting to know civil society better, and we'll focus on the methods applied by funding institutions and the shrinking areas of civil society and the changes in donation culture after the pandemic. We will have Birce Altay from Third Sector Foundation of Turkey, Jenny Hodgson from Global Fund for Community Foundation, and Civil Society Center representative Tezcan, Eralp, Abay, and Liana, Varon from Support for Civil Society Foundation. And the moderator will be Olcay, Özer from our Capacity Development Institution. Welcome back to our session. We will talk about the culture of donation and philanthropic methods. First, some reminders, some housekeeping issues. One of the participants will join us on Zoom. This session will be in Turkish. However, our speaker joining us on Zoom, she will speak English. So if you need interpretation, please get your headsets. And then at the end of every session, we have a QR code shown on the screen, and your comments and feedback are very important for all of us. So please feel free to fill in the evaluation forms at the end of the session. So we have 4 very distinguished guests today with whom we will talk about philanthropy discussions and civil society and philanthropic methods. By the way, hi, Jenny. So we will talk about financial sustainability, and getting to know different models for fundraising is very important for our survival and existence. So in this session, we will try to learn from one another, and we will try to better understand the activities and the models that each of us are engaged in. So welcome, and I don't want to take much of your time because time management has really been very well up until now. So I think we can do it as well. So I'll start right away with Birce, Third Sector Foundation of Turkey, or TÜSEV in short. You have experience of working with different institutions, so let's start with you. For a long time, you have been working on the donation culture, and you issue a report every year on individual donations in Turkey. You work in the field of philanthropy, and you are generating quite an important amount of data based on these activities. So can you please talk about the report and also talk about the donation culture in the shrinking civic space? Can you talk about this? And as TÜSEV, you have a capacity of being an umbrella organization that brings together many institutions. You work together with different institutions, rights-based institutions from civil area. So can you also talk about your role with regard to donation culture? Okay, hello everyone, this is Birce. First of all, I will start by the instructions I received from the festival organization yesterday. I am Birce. I am a 35-year-old woman. I have brown hair. I'm wearing a shirt, beige shirt. I'm wearing blue pants, and I'm sitting next to Liana on the stage. Thank you for this question. Well, our research started in 2004, and the first report was published in 2006. We try to do it every 3 years. Well, last year, because of the pandemic, we had some changes in our schedule. So the 2021 report was actually published this year in May. For us and for everyone working in the field of civil society, there are a couple of issues that come to the fore that we need to talk about. First of all, civil society participation and donation practices are having an increasing trend, especially with COVID and the impact of floods and wildfires around the country might have had an impact on the increasing culture of donating to civil society organizations. But thinking about the CSOs active in Turkey, when we ask people the areas that CSO work in, for instance, people think fight against discrimination or for women's rights are among the top 10 answers. So in terms of donating to CSOs, maybe the situation is different, but in perception, we see this. And culture of donation or donating is not very much different than the trends around the world. Last year, for instance, in many places in the world, people participated in volunteering or fundraising activities for a cause. That's the case in Turkey as well. But for rights-based or rights-oriented approaches in Turkey, we can maybe focus on the fact that people, when they think they cannot protest against something that they think is going wrong, they try to donate to institutions that work in that field, or they volunteer for those institutions. So maybe at this point we can talk about donations from a different perspective, but we should not forget that donating is a form of solidarity, and it would be meaningful to draw a framework based on this. And also, when we think about what the rights-based institutions or organizations can do about individual donations, maybe we can try to establish our own community of donors and try to increase their impact. We all know that fundraising is not the easiest thing in our country. We can sometimes use our own relations and networks to do this. So as the institution, we establish collaboration and we try to develop the donation culture from different perspectives. And if this relation is established with different institutions in Turkey, what we want to support repeatedly is to increase the number of donor foundations and grant organizations. Especially, they sometimes have a desire to establish a different sort of relationship with the young people, and we try to see how we can channelize the grants we receive from them. And again, in our methods, we try to talk about the existing situation in Turkey for fundraising and for grants and the missing areas. And we try to show that there is a gap. So we talk about the existing situation, try to explain people what the situation is, and then we try to make our best efforts to work actively with the civil society organizations. Yes, thank you so much. A very nice summary. So you talked about creating a community, so I'll turn to Jenny. They have a macro level approach in that regard, and in terms of community building, they are working on this. So the word philanthropy is mainly associated with foundations established by rich people, for instance, and by donations globally. And this is the case. But Global Fund for Communities, where Jenny is from, is working on developing social philanthropy all around the world. So, Jenny, with your experience, can you talk about protection and development of rights, and how does social philanthropy make a contribution to this? Can you talk about it? And you have this Shift the Power program, your flagship program. Can you talk about this? Because I think it's a good example.
Certainly. Greetings, colleagues from Johannesburg, where it's winter. I feel like I'm this giant at the back of the room, but it's a pleasure to be with you. And isn't technology amazing? And hello to my fellow panelists. So that's right. I represent the Global Fund for Community Foundations. And over the last 16 years, we've been building a network of local funds and foundations around the world, particularly in contexts where the idea of organized philanthropy is still quite new, and the idea that philanthropy can belong to ordinary people, can be an expression of solidarity, empathy, rights claiming, support, dissent. This is all still quite a new concept in many countries of the world, despite the fact that all countries have had their own traditions and histories of solidarity and mutual self-help. I think the moment we're in the context of human rights, I mean, today in South Africa, a government minister has accused a human rights organization of sabotaging government. And I think this is a common narrative we're finding around the world, that human rights organizations are often being demonized by governments. So it's essential that they have a local constituency and support base. Arguably, the human rights movement hasn't always done itself many favors by emphasizing civil and political rights over economic and social rights, and creating the idea that human rights is somehow an expertise that belongs to a few rather than a concept of dignity and the right to be and exist peacefully for everybody. And so you see within civil society that human rights organizations still often tend to be supported by external funders, international funders, and that leaves them extremely vulnerable to these kinds of accusations of acting on behalf of governments, foreign governments, for example. So in our work, we use the framing of community philanthropy and the idea that all people have assets and resources, and that when they come together and agree to pool their resources, this isn't just about money, it's actually about organizing collective action and building power. Now, it's very easy to think of, that this is fraught with complexity if you're talking about communities, because often in a community you have a majority community and minority communities. And so the community can sometimes not necessarily advocate on behalf of minority communities. So the work of many of our partners around the world has been to try and weave this idea that the community is everyone. It is those at the edges, those who are most marginalized, those who are most vulnerable, and realize that the rights of everyone, the right for their rights to be protected and recognized, matters to everyone. So I think for me, community philanthropy is really a proposition around bringing people together to see each other and be with each other, and to start to build that connectivity and that kind of trust. So many of our partners, for example, will use small grants as a way to get resources to multiple community groups, but at the same time be able to bring them together to start building connections between them, to create this sense of a bigger us. And on the giving side, I think it's pretty much the same. The idea that if we put our resources on the table as community members and look each other in the eye, we're already starting to build some sense of solidarity and trust. So for me, community philanthropy is really about oiling the machinery of a good society, which centers dignity and rights and equity. And it claims back human rights as something that belongs to everybody, not just to the few. I'll stop there.
Çok teşekkürler.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for your contribution. So let's shift to more local examples from the field. I'll turn to Tezcan, Civil Society Development Center. I have a question for you. Since 2017, you are providing institutional grant support to different civil society organizations. This is one of your activities as a center. Can you talk about the formulation of your grant-giving strategy, thinking about COVID-19 and shrinking civic space as well? How did this need change over the years, if it has changed, of course? And can you give us some examples from the field, from the local level? Hello. And thank you. Okay, I'm very, very poor in time management. So I hope I will be able to wrap up in 10 minutes. First of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Yes, Civil Society Development Center has been working to empower civil society organizations. This is the second phase of this program that we carry out. So I'll give you some information about the program first. The program is called Together. What did we aim to do with the previous Together program? Let me talk about phase one, but before I do that, I'll talk about what we want to do, not within the framework of this program called Together, but in general what we want to do. Because understanding what we do is all about understanding what we want to do, is all about understanding what we do. Because half of the time we spend should be spent on why we do it also. So for 5 minutes, I'll talk about why we are involved in these issues, and then I'll talk about what we do. Well, Together, or Birlikte in Turkish, is a support program to empower civil society organizations. It's not only for civil society organizations, but it's also a support program to empower the civil society at large, because empowering civil society is something bigger than empowering one CSO. But even empowering one CSO is a multidimensional issue. This support program called Together, when we designed how we are going to empower the civil society, we are also asking what we are aiming to empower. So why are we supporting the civil society? Because we all are members, activists, administrators of CSOs, and as such, we have some expectations from the CSOs. So we have certain ideas in our minds, and we try to help these CSOs fulfill their mission in line with their mission, whatever it is. This program is actually designed to help them realize their mission, whatever it is, as I said. So how are we going to empower something that we call as whatever it is? So generally speaking, we can say that all of us in the civil society, regardless of our field of activity, regardless of the structure of our CSOs, we have some fundamental motivations. Number one, we all want to improve certain things. What we expect from the CSOs, one of the most important things is to make the world a better place, to improve the society we live in, improve the generation we live in, the political environment we live in. So we're trying to improve certain things, make things better. We also want to make the smell of tomatoes better, and we also want to make the living conditions of street animals better. Children who have to work on the streets, we want to improve their rights better also. So one of the main expectations from civil society is to provide support to the organizations that work in the field of improving things. However, this is not something that is based on actions only. Improving things is not something that doesn't have a taste, color, climate, etc., etc. So we are trying to make things better for people and where they live. So while we're trying to improve things, we also try to make it more beautiful and more aesthetic.
So this is not only limited to physical aspects, but we also try to make our communication, our social relations more beautiful, better. So the fundamental question is how organizations who try to make the world a better place can make it, through which methods. And also there is even a more complicated question that relates us to one another. So how can we make the world a more democratic place while making the world a better place? So, which also entails us having more democratic decision-making processes, or more democratic neighborhoods or units. So, civil society is there to make things beautiful, to create democracy, and of course we need to come up with a modality that will support their actions. So yes, this is what we want to achieve, but on the other hand, circumstances make it so difficult. So there is a shrinking civic space, and it doesn't only mean that it is shrinking because of the laws being enacted, but we also have shrinking limits for our actions. So there is a certain restriction on our will where we act upon. And of course, it makes everything more difficult, and we are being squeezed into that. And we have wars, which make things even more complicated. I mean, I don't want to portray you a grim picture in this afternoon session, but I believe every one of you know what I mean. We have wars, we have migration, we have poverty, and all these issues that were exacerbated after the war in Ukraine. Now, what we can do in the face of all these challenges. So, digitalization is one of the issues that I'm interested in. I don't know if you would remember, Yıldırım Türker wrote an article in the 1990s. At that time, he defined a human as someone who would be a being using a keyboard. But in fact, as of today, we are not only acting as keyboards, but we are also the generator of data. So everything we say, everything we write becomes a data. So all the data that we produce individually or at CSO level, they also become an obstacle in their own right. Because the data that we produce tends to restrict our emancipation because it is being used by certain authorities. So yes, Birlikte or Together program, the EU-funded program, is working on these kind of questions. How can we support CSOs in this area? So if you want to achieve all this, in other words, if you want to change the world, I have bad news for you. You need to be strong or resilient. Unless otherwise, it will not be possible for us to make things more beautiful or make this world a better place. Organizations, CSOs, should be stronger, and their interaction or cooperation with one another should also be stronger. And CSOs' relationship or ties to the cause that they're working for should also be far stronger. So I would like to once again underline the importance of that. There should be a strong connection or strong linkage between a CSO and the issues that the CSO would like to work. And this was the ultimate aim of our program together. This was our starting point as well, as we designed the program. And the MFA's Directorate for EU Affairs indeed assumed the ownership of a program that we have been working on, and then we talk with them, and ultimately we now have this Birlikte or Together program. So we want to empower CSOs which would like to change the world. So on the one hand, we're talking about enhancing the capacity of CSOs, their organizational capacity. So indeed, we have some strengths and weaknesses in this process, because we are very good at certain things, but then we need to really discuss how we can empower or strengthen organizational capacity. So if we want to become stronger, we need stronger CSOs, and for that we need better and well-informed decisions, we need better governance strategies, we need better or smarter procurement, we need better digitalization strategies. And we should also have the means and channels to mainstream our issues, the issues at stake, in collaboration with all other CSOs. So, Birlikte or Together is not only a financial support program. So as part of this financial support program, we also have secondary aims. We have mentoring program, whereby we want to act in solidarity with CSOs in their journeys. And another component is enhancing exchange and collaboration between CSOs. I mean, we also have partners from Ireland, and we also try to explore with them some cooperation ideas. I mean, I could not wrap up. That was a very good demonstration of how I could not wrap up well. Wrapping up is my duty, says the moderator. It was a very good account of your experience. So you highlighted the importance of making things more beautiful and better, and how we can do it more more like a lasting or sustainable true collaboration. And now I would like to turn to Liana Varon, Support for Civil Society Foundation. In your most recent report, you talk about diversification of financial resources and perhaps reallocation or redesign of grant schemes. Can you tell us more about this report? And also, can you tell us more about the needs and strategies? Okay, so let me pick up from where Tezcan has left off. It all started with the outbreak of the pandemic, but now that I look back, with the shrinking civic space and economic crisis in the country, they oblige us to constantly navigate in ambiguous settings. So we had to live in this uncertain environment. Perhaps in the future we will once again look back and we would find that we were very creative. But there are many things that we would like to achieve under current circumstances, for instance, working with donors or contributing to empowering civil society. So we always need to invent a certain methodology, a certain approach, and we need to do it in a way that would not harm either the donor or the CSO in question. So we have the pandemic, economic crisis, shrinking civic space, so everything becomes an element for this restriction. I believe one of the biggest achievements of civil society at the onset of the pandemic is that we were very quick to adapt. We were very quick to figure out how to adjust our activities. So yes, we are a grant-making organization, and we bring together donors and civil society organizations, be it individual donors or corporate donors or international organizations or institutions. So how can we do fundraising? Because if we cannot do fundraising, then we cannot offer grants. It is as simple as that. So we thought the private sector may be withdrawing their support during the pandemic. That's why we focused more on the international donors, those who are particularly interested in Turkey. So we have Turkey Mosaic Foundation, a UK-based diaspora organization which was started by people from Turkey. We also worked with Dalian Foundation. So in fact, we have implemented a survival strategy at a time where everything was so uncertain for us and for CSOs that we have been working with. So this was our message to the donors. We will learn together, we will overcome this process together, but we need your support. And frankly speaking, this expanded our foundation in terms of financial resources, in terms of human resources. But as of today, we also question ourselves if this is the very essence of our foundation, because our original idea was to activate or mobilize donors within Turkey. So now we need to elaborate on pros and cons of what we have been through. And as for the grant making, I think one of the biggest lessons we have learned as the foundation is that we've learned how to listen to. The uncertainties that I've been talking about, they've been affecting us so much, but they have also been affecting others, other organizations. And we don't really talk much to each other in terms of our needs. We don't really express or share this. And now in this process, we asked the following question to our CSOs: what would you need in this process? So it was a very important question that taught us how to listen to them. And this also helped us to put into place new mechanisms. For instance, nowadays, when we launch a call for applications in any team, by the way, we cover about 10 different teams, ranging from arts to the right of children. So we always consult with CSOs. As the Foundation for Supporting Civil Society, we don't designate a certain thematic area for a given year. We engage in consultation with different CSOs or grant-making organizations, and we ask about their experience, and their experiences guide us in our decision-making. And this may also seem from the outside as being inconsistent, because perhaps one year we offer support to a certain team and the next year to an entirely different team. But we are not making these decisions only by ourselves. We are making a consultation with all these actors. By the way, we don't really talk to 100 people, yet we talk with people who are competent in their field, and it helps us make informed decisions. And by the way, it's of course not an easy process, because we don't always see that the needs that were articulated to us are reflected in the applications we receive, because we also then question ourselves if we are trying to impose a certain thematic area on CSOs. These are all the questions that we have been working on. And building on what Birce said, while working on the reallocation or redesigning of grant schemes, we feel that we may have hard time in diversifying our financial resources. However, with the outbreak of the pandemic, we started a Cemre fund for supporting those in poverty. And we have observed in our daily practice what Birce and her research found. One is the issue of emergency. Because sometimes donors, they don't really make their donation decisions based on rights-based organizations or environment organizations. But when there is a wildfire, or when people cannot pay their utility bills in economic crisis, then it gets to them. So communicating with them in the right way helps us a lot. That's the reason why in 2021-2022, the Cemre Fund received a lot of support from donors. And sometimes we can also be biased against donors too, so that we should not talk to them or act in a way when we don't have the right tools. Thank you very much indeed. We listened to different perspectives, but one thing that you all mentioned in common was the following: doing things together, creating things together, not only giving grants or giving donations. So doing things together also matters. So now I would like to ask you about your perspective about prospects, about the future, what the future holds for us in terms of donations, grant making, about the localization of funds. Let us start with Jenny, and then we will turn to the room, and then we will have a Q&A.
Thank you. And thank you. It was great to listen to my colleagues on the panel. I think COVID-19 changed everything, and I think the war in Ukraine is going to do something similar too. During COVID-19, it didn't matter if you were a human rights organization, a community development organization, or whatever. If the community knew you and trusted you, you had to be there and you had to respond. And I think that idea that community development is holistic and it requires both to be able to, for civil society, be able to hold rights up and claim them, but also to be relevant and rooted to communities at different moments. And I think we have to almost not go back to where we were before, where we saw philanthropy as money. We waited for donors to approve that our work mattered. Actually, COVID-19 around the world, in rich countries and in poor, showed the importance of communities, mutuality, solidarity, really reconnecting that sort of essence of what it means to be part of a community. And also we saw, on the one hand, human rights organizations handing out hand sanitizers and community development organizations realizing that the most vulnerable and marginalized were being left out. So starting to have a human rights lens in that work. So I really sort of see the critical role of saying what was good that came out of COVID that reminded us that this isn't about organizations and foundations and money. This is about people and trust and connections and power. And actually people working together, pooling their resources, claiming their rights, that is real power. So rather than see philanthropy as a sort of space to fill gaps in a kind of charitable way, it is a space in which citizens can flex their social muscle and by doing so start to be heard and build connection and solidarity with each other. So to me, this seems absolutely critical. It's like we've come out of COVID, we're all exhausted, the war in Ukraine is happening, everyone is in danger of burnout. But what can we take of what we've learned about what didn't work, which COVID highlighted, and what did work, and how do we build on what did work for the kind of system that we really want and need in the future?
Aslında önce izlememiz gereken bir kısımdan belki
Let's talk about the part that we need to monitor, because I forgot to say that the results of the research we conducted were retrieved from the October-November 2021 period, and at that time the economic crisis did not have such a huge impact on people's life. Charities Aid Foundation just announced a report in UK. There is a sharp decline in individual donations, and it is directly related with the economic fluctuations, they said. So in Turkey we need to be watching for that, and it's important because for grant giving institutions, grant-making institutions, organizations, it impacts the amount of the grants that they are going to allocate. Of course, for human rights or rights-based activities, the future of such activities and the discussions regarding the future of philanthropy should be held on healthy platforms. Most recently, an institution working in the fields of human rights accepted a grant, and there was a manifesto about it regarding the source of the funds, where they would be allocated. I think this is a healthy method. And I think Liana also talked about their experience very well through participatory grant-making models. But from my perspective, we need to remind the civil society their power to make decisions, and we shouldn't focus only on project cycles, but for the institutions to survive and for the staff of the institutions to feel safe and good. We need to have some programs focusing on this in terms of rights-based philanthropy. And apart from this, the civil society is doing something very well, especially in Turkey. We can put pressure on the private sector. We are very demanding in that area, so that we share certain things in a more vocal manner. And I think we have a strong muscle in that area, especially rights-based organizations will start to get the fruits of their work in the future and get what they demand. But I can maybe say as a last remark that yes, things are becoming more and more, and maybe the current period is the most challenging and most difficult one for us, but we should continue working, producing, and we should continue to be hopeful and optimistic for the future. Yes. Okay, I'll start with what Liana has said and end with what Birce has said. I think I can do it. Liana said something. In the current period for reallocation of grants, we are developing some strategies, she said, and we discuss if this is creating question marks about the organization itself, she said. So that's something that we will discuss more. The funds we use will identify our, will be a part of our identity, will define our identity. So how we use which funds will be more and more important, and why we use them. So that's going to either show us the legality of our work, most probably. Why it seems to be the case? I think it's because as Birce said, we are going through a difficult time. She was kind enough to not to talk about the brutal dimension of the difficulty, but going back to 2015, for instance, we had explosions on the street, bombs were exploding. The period started with that, then elections came, and the trench operation happened, the failed coup d'etat happened, state of emergency were declared, things were going very bad, and then came the pandemic. So this has really been a very, very rough patch for us, a very difficult period, and this damn uncertainty, as it seems, will continue, as mentioned by Liana. So our planning capabilities are really paralyzed because of all this uncertainty. And Birce did something which I didn't in the beginning of remarks. I'm in my mid-40s, I'm wearing glasses, I'm a male, I'm wearing a blue shirt, and I'm wearing stone color pants, and Liana is sitting between me and Birce, and on my right hand side I have Olcay. And I still remember where I stopped my sentence before I started describing my physical appearance, which is that this uncertainty seems to be there for some time. It will continue. So under such uncertain conditions, the organizations in the coming period will be addressing something more and more. Of course, this uncertainty increases the resilience of the organizations. It's not a bad thing only. We have been going through an uncertain period for a long time, and this period has almost been 10 years. It's not a short period of time, and these 10 years have shown us that organizations are, in a way, finding their way through the storm. So the civil society is continuing to have a strong position. Maybe even the worst days are over, we can say, but there's another issue. The field of activities are becoming more and more political. The fields of activities are politicized, and the funds in these fields are also politicized. Thus, thinking about the funds will also become a political thing in the future. And from that perspective, this healthy discussion between grants and donations will be expecting us. In a world of ever-increasing grants, where are we going to position the donations? I'm talking about individual donations. Because they're important in terms of creating a social base. The relations we establish with these people, the donations are a manifestation of those relations. And to further strengthen that, we will have eventually a chance. So, to sum up, funds will become a more determining part of our identities. Secondly, where we get the funds from is going to be important. Donations versus grants will be a topic of our agenda, as it seems. Thank you. Birce talked about hope, so I'll end on an optimistic and hopeful note. I am a person who works with donors on a daily basis mainly. I have to repeat again and again that people, companies who want to donate in Turkey, we do have them. We have groups and individuals who want to donate. Sometimes we might not have access to them, we don't see them, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist. And the second thing is that there are many people who want to support the rights, and some corporations to a certain extent, they also exist. So when we talk about donations or philanthropy, the civil society organizations, yes, they have an issue of financial sustainability, but we don't see that donation making is a very clean thing in itself. Sometimes we don't want to look into the details of donations or philanthropy because we think as if something else is happening there. And we have to talk about this. Do we really want to have these individual donations and work with corporates? We have to make a decision. Otherwise, we will still be discussing all these issues around fundraising and how we fail to raise funds for years and years. For rights-based organizations, I also would like to say something. Birce said, donating as an instrument of participation or as a means of protesting, she said, the donors I have worked with are mainly donating because of a political decision. So donations are related to their political decisions and who they are, and they take that risk. Once they choose where to donate, and once they take action and really donate, make the donation, they also exhibit a political stance. I don't know about the research to support this with data, but in Turkey, people mostly donate for scholarships or assistance, we think, but there are people who only want to support rights-based initiatives. I'm also a small donor, and I never make a donation to an organization that is not rights-based. So there's a huge crowd like myself, even within this room, people who only want to support rights-based initiatives. So I think it's important to not fall into the trap of despair, and we shouldn't think like we don't have donors, nobody donates to rights-based initiatives. We shouldn't think like that. Every field has its own audience. It's all about how you express yourself to that audience and how you ask for support. Just like Tezcan said, it's all about your communication power. And of course, donations shouldn't be considered in terms of money only. Some people share their time, some people share their expertise. Sometimes it's more important than money for civil society organizations. We should talk about this, although this might not be the trend for the future, but for philanthropy and donation making, we need to continue talking about them. And I talked about these consultation meetings, and I would like to share some feedback we received. Rights-based and service-based activities will be working more in parallel to one another. There will be a gray area, let's say. Services will be important, and it will all be about providing the services in a rights-based manner. I'll speed up. what I can say is that, for instance, for gender equality, we had this consultation meeting and the experts in the field told us that you should give support for the services provided to be women and LGBTI people. That's the feedback we received. That's going to be a more important need in the future. And the donor institutions in Turkey, especially international donors in Turkey, I think selection process will be very important in terms of seeing what kind of an action they will take, or maybe they'll just wait and see the results of the elections. And this might impact the funds we access. And maybe it's not a trend for the future, but just like Birce said, as the institution, we are giving small grants. And our target for this year is to be able to give 100,000 TL. But even that amount doesn't mean anything because of the inflation we have and based on the minimum wage. And it means that one of the things we need to prefer or make a choice over in the future is maybe to support less number of institutions to be able to give a bigger amount of grant. So in an environment whereby we only have few donors, this might make a big difference. So I try to focus on the near future a little bit, but all these things that we are discussing are about these issues. Thank you. Thank you. Of course, it's not very easy to make any predictions about the far future in Turkey. So thank you very much for your contributions. Maybe we can get at least one question. One question at least. Two maybe. Thank you. I'd like to thank Tezcan and Liana. Tezcan said that with the funds we receive, our identities will also change. We all think about this. We are shifting towards softer rights processes. We will have different processes. Those working in the fields of rights will maybe suffer. So what can the donor institutions do? I'll ask the same thing to Liana and Birce. Very recently, the business world started an initiative in the field of human rights. Can this be an opportunity? The private sector is supporting certain rights fields in the last decade, but in some areas, like softer issues like the women's rights or children's rights, are now focused on by them. So maybe in the future, will the private sector be in a position to support more fundamental human rights rather than soft rights? I also have two questions for anyone who wants to answer. There is a brain drain from Turkey. Does it have any impact on philanthropy, or do you anticipate any impact on philanthropy? The Turquoise Foundation, right? No, Mosaic, I'm sorry. Because of the Mosaic Foundation. That's question number one. And question number two, Birce, you talked about it. The grant-giving organizations number should increase. It's very important to have more organizations. What do you see for the future? Is there hope? What do we need to do? If yes, if we need to do something, who are the relevant actors? We have only 2 minutes. Okay, very fast. Cengiz's question first. Private sector, civil society relations. We can at least say that in the private sector, it's not only about the senior management of the companies, but we should remember that people working in those companies are human beings like ourselves. They need the civil society work, so we should start approaching and perceiving them as such. So the choices of those people employed in the companies, the areas they want to support, these are very important. And people working in civil society organizations have to develop mechanisms so that people working in private companies will donate more to CSOs. We need to find some mechanisms. Next question. I don't have any observations about the brain drain issue you referred to, but looking at Europe and US, the foundations are actually working for the purpose of giving grants, but in Turkey that is not the case. But it's not a very pessimistic scenario. Certain foundations that might seem to have a very rigid structure are considering to establish grant schemes. Maybe they need some support and guidance, but once we take the first step, they can come together with the experts in the field, and especially the new generation want further steps to be taken by the foundations. So there is room for progress in that area. And from where I stand, I can say that the number of grant giving institutions in Turkey, we can increase the number of grant making institutions in Turkey, and we can all do something about it. I'll just announce the next panel. Yes, we have to close the session, so thank you so much for your contribution. Coffee is served outside, so we can have the Q&A during the coffee. Thank you so much for your contribution and responses. And I'd like to thank our audience. And Jenny, thank you as well. Thank you for your contribution. Next session will start at 4:30. We will talk about the struggle for peace, women and LGBTI+ movements, participation in conflict resolution processes. See you in the next panel.